Hello team, welcome back to VProject UK. Since we've launched the channel about a year and a half ago, both on YouTube and on Instagram, we've had a lot of questions and a lot of requests for information about products and their uses. And one recent subject that came up was the difference between the two Rupes Yellow Fine pads. Both are slightly different colour, they both have a different profile, and they both come packaged very differently. So, what is the difference between the two pads, if any? So in this video, we're going to be discussing these two pads, which is the main pad we use here at VProject UK. So, without wasting too much time, let's start the video. So, on the channel, we've previously released a video about machine polishers and introduction to them. We've also released a video about pads and where you should start and what pads are ideal for what situation. And we've also released a video about the UltraFibre pad, which has been quite popular. So if you've not seen those videos, make sure you check them out because they may answer some questions you may have after watching this video. So, as mentioned in the introduction, before we can talk about these two pads, we need to touch on machine polishers very quickly. So in the detailing world, aside from pneumatic air-driven polishers, there are two main types of polisher. You've got rotary polishers and dual action polishers. Rotary polishers will generally spin on their axis in one circle. They just spin around, whereas dual action polishers like this will not only spin on a circle on its axis, but it'll also oscillate, which is the dual action. Now, when it comes to dual action machines, there's actually two types. You've got free spinning machines, similar to this one, and you've also got gear driven machines. And there's differences between them, which we'll explain now, and there's also advantages and disadvantages. So, with free spinning machines similar to this one, what you'll have is a backing plate, which as mentioned, spins in a circle, but will also oscillate, which is the dual action. Now, what you'll find with dual action machines similar to this one, which are not gear driven, is that they are free spinning, which means that there's nothing directly driving the spindle or the axle which goes to the backing plate, which means that when you angle the machine, it can actually stall or stop spinning, which we'll demonstrate very shortly. The advantages of free spinning dual action machines are that if you're new to machine polishing or you don't have a very good technique, sometimes when you angle the machine and it stalls, it can be a good thing because you're not concentrating all the force of that machine in one spot and removing more clear coat or paint than you should. So it can be quite detrimental if you have a machine which is directly spinning and you've got it at an angle and it's actually grinding in just one corner. A free spinning machine will stop that from happening. The second advantage of free spinning dual action machines is that generally the orbits or the free spinning oscillating nature of the machine will have a much larger throw than gear driven machines. So with free spinning machines you can have 8mm or 12mm, 15mm such as this machine, or sometimes even a 21mm. So the advantage of that is that the larger the throw, the quicker you're doing the correction, you're covering an area quicker if you have a large surface area, which means it's much more efficient in terms of time. So those are the two advantages of having a free spinning dual action machine similar to this one. So as a quick demonstration on this dual action polisher, and this is the ShineMate EB351 515 cordless polisher. If you've seen our previous video about an intro to machine polishing, you would have seen a detailer's top tip about making sure you mark the backing plate so you can see when it's actually spinning and when it's actually stalling. And being a dual action polisher, as we've mentioned before, the pad will actually spin on an axis, but it will also oscillate, which is the dual action. So check that video out if you've not seen it, because we talk about machine polishers in slightly more detail, especially the DAS6 Pro Plus machine, which is fantastic. So as a quick demonstration, you will see on this free spinning dual action machine that when I hold the machine flat to the surface of the paint, you'll see that the backing plate is actually spinning quite freely. However, with dual action free spinning machines, as soon as you angle the pad slightly, it will actually stop spinning, which is why it's so important to have that mark, so you know when the machine is actually doing some work and it's not doing any work. So in this quick demonstration, we'll show you now. Keep an eye on that black mark and you'll see when I angle it that it will actually stop spinning, which is where gear driven machines are beneficial, because the gear driven machine, because the spindle is directly driven by a gear, even if you angle the machine, it will keep spinning. But we'll just demonstrate that now. So hopefully you could see that when I was angling the machine, you could actually see the black mark, which means that it was not spinning freely, which means you're not doing much correction at all. So that's the difference between a free spinning dual action machine and a gear driven, in that the gear driven would have kept spinning because it's directly driven. So hopefully that was a good demonstration. Now, if this was a gear driven machine, the advantage would be that it doesn't stall. So if you do have a good technique and you're experienced in using machine polishers and you want to get correction done a lot quicker, using a gear driven machine means that it's not going to stall and you'll get more accurate correction if you know how to use machine polishers accurately. The other thing with gear driven machines is that the throws tend to be smaller. They generally tend to be about 8mm. Sometimes bigger isn't always better. So although this free spinning machine would have a large throw, so in the case of this machine it's 15mm, which is about the optimum, sometimes on softer clear coats having a large throw is actually detrimental, because they're so soft and they correct so quickly that a larger throw actually causes more imperfections that you then need to go and polish or perfect or jewel after. So sometimes having a smaller throw is actually beneficial as well, because some clear coats, especially Japanese cars, will have clear coats which will actually correct very quickly. So a small throw is better. So those are the two differences mainly, just very quickly, about dual action in terms of free spinning and gear driven. And this is important as we talk about the pads now. So when Rupes released the Yellow Fine pad, which is one of our main pads that we use at V-Project UK, a lot of people were using these on gear driven machines. So when you look at the description on most websites when you go to purchase this pad, it will just say it's suitable for a dual action. However, there was no difference in terms of the description or whether you should use this on a free spinning machine or a gear driven machine. On a gear driven machine, because the spindle is directly being driven by the gear, much more energy and force is being transferred to the pad. And these pads are fairly thick and they're fairly forgiving, and they're open cell, which means you get a lot of great correction from this pad. However, when you use this on a gear driven machine, because they are slightly thicker, what was happening is that the pad could not take the extra energy being generated by a gear driven machine, and they're actually disintegrating and breaking. Such is the nature of this pad. So a lot of people were complaining that this pad was not very good, when in fact it was more user error. They were using the wrong pad for the wrong machine. So what Rupes did is they released the Rupes Milli pad. So ignore the wool on this pad, but the Rupes Milli pad, which is what this is with the wool stuck on it, is a lot thinner than the actual standard pad. So if I put them next to each other for comparison, you could see that the Milli pad was a lot thinner. So when Rupes released the Milli pad, this was actually designed to be used on gear driven machines. As I say, ignore the wool because they just put the wool on the milli pad. And because it's much thinner, what happens is as the energy of the gear driven machine is transferred to the pad, because it's thinner, it was not disintegrating. However, people were still finding that because the foam structure itself was the same as a standard pad, that it was a little bit too soft to get the correction that the machine would then be capable of giving you. And what they found is that although these were not disintegrating, they were not giving you the results that gear-driven machines ideally wanted or were capable of providing. Which is where, recently, Rupes released the DA Fine pad. And we'll just talk about this a little bit now. So, the subtle differences in the description, and sorry, but the actual writing on this has worn off. Just the detailer's top tip about that is that these pads, when you've got the writing on the pad, they're designed to wear off quite quickly after the first use. That's how you know whether a pad is brand new, such as this one, or whether a pad has been used before. So you can just about see, we've used this once just to try it, you can see that this is the DA Fine, and this is just referred to as the Fine pad. So there's subtle differences in the description itself, but there's actually a big difference in the pad itself. So not only are they a different color, but they're actually a different profile, and they're also actually a different cell foam structure as well. The DA Fine, i.e. the new one, is actually slightly firmer than the standard fine pads that you can get from Rupes. So why did they release this pad? This pad is marketed as being suitable for not only a standard dual action free spinning machine, but also a gear driven machine. They've made it a slightly firmer structure, and also the contour itself is much better for gear driven machines because this pad allows the energy and force being generated from a gear driven machine to be transferred to the pad, which then gives you much better or slightly faster correction. And that could be a good or bad thing depending on what you're trying to achieve. So to summarize this video, those are the two main differences between these two pads. Although this can be used on a free spinning dual action machine, we still find that the standard Rupes Fine yellow pad is better on a free spinning machine. This is slightly firmer, has a different profile, which is better for a gear driven machine, whereas what we find is that for a free spinning machine, the standard Rupes Yellow Fine pad works slightly better. However, if you have a gear driven dual action machine, then you probably are better off with the new DA Fine pad, which has recently been released. So to give the pads some context, this is how they rank in terms of the pads we would use. So the first entry-level pad we would use is the Rupes Superfine white pad. This pad we would use for polishing or jeweling, or that final stage when we are going for that final correction and final jeweling of any surface we might be using. So that would be the first pad we would use. The next pad in terms of aggressiveness would be the standard Rupes Fine yellow pad. This is probably the pad we would use more often than not. It's the one we use the most, and this pad is where we would start when we start doing correction on a vehicle surface. If we're going for some heavier correction, then we would opt to use the Meguiars Detailer DMC5 microfiber cutting disc. An absolutely fantastic pad to use for correcting slightly heavier defects or slightly deeper scratches on a paint surface. So that would be the next pad that we would use, the DMC5 microfiber cutting disc. So when we talk about the DA Fine pad from Rupes, the new yellow DA Fine pad, this is slightly firmer and slightly more aggressive than the standard Rupes yellow pad. So for us, this would be somewhere here. If we wanted to use a pad which is slightly more aggressive than the standard Rupes yellow, we would use the DA Fine because that will give you something in between this and the Meguiars. The next pad we would opt to use is the Buff and Shine Eurofiber 50/50 pad. This pad is absolutely fantastic because it has a blend of 50% finishing fibres and 50% cutting fibres, both microfiber, but it gives you a great blend. So if you wanted to go somewhere in between the Rupes Yellow and the full microfiber DMC5 from Meguiars, but you didn't want quite that aggressiveness in terms of the difference of cut, then you could opt to use the UltraFibre 50/50 pad. So this would be the pads in that order that we would opt to use. If we had some real severe defects, then we could opt to use the DMC5 Xtra cut discs. And the difference between this disc and the standard microfiber disc from Meguiars is that, as you can see, they are a lot thinner. In fact, they are super thin when you compare them to the actual standard DMC5. And what that means is that more of the energy and force from the actual machine polisher itself transfers onto the pad, because there's no interface giving you that forgiveness or loss of energy, and this gives you a much more aggressive cut on the actual paint finish itself. So if we wanted to go slightly heavier, then this is what we would opt to use. The next stage from that, if we wanted to remove some real heavy oxidation or some real deep scratches, then we would opt to use the Rupes X-Cut sanding pads, and this is the 3000 grit. So that will be the next level in terms of aggressiveness. And after that, if we wanted to use something which is even more aggressive for real deep scratches or oxidation, then we would use a 1500 grit Rupes X-Cut sanding discs, and this will get rid of some really heavy defects. So at V Project UK, in terms of the context of the yellow pads, that will be the order of the pads we would use. Apologies for the background noise in this video, but there is some building work going on nearby, so unfortunately I couldn't do anything about the noise. But hopefully you found this video useful and it gave you some context about the two Rupes yellow pads and what the differences are. So we hope you liked this video. If you did, make sure you give us a thumbs up, make sure you subscribe, and please make sure if you're watching this video you do subscribe, because every subscription really helps us. It will help the channel grow and will help produce videos for you and future content. So make sure you subscribe, make sure you press the bell icon to get alerts for future videos, and make sure you check us out on Instagram and make sure you subscribe on there as well. Every subscription helps and will help us grow the channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.